Hi, this is Marvin Rappaport, a member of the Crawford Filbert B. Crawford Public Library Committee on Local History. I'm joined today by Lynn Skolnick, who chairs that committee and is a former president of the library. And we have an interesting conversation scheduled today in our series of interviews with those who grew up in Sullivan County and whose lives are centered here, and those also who are involved in the Borscht Belt and the resort industry. Today's sort of a combination in terms of the people that we're going to interview. The primary person that we're going to start with is Jacob Billig, and I'm going to ask Jake to tell us a little bit about when and where he was born and also how his family came to Sullivan County. Jake?
Thank you. Good morning, Marvin. Good morning, Lynn. And good morning, cousin Morris, who is an equal player here today. I was born Monticello Hospital, 1958, March 7th. Grew up in Woodburn. Went to school at Fallsburg Central. Graduated in 76. Cornell and Pace Law School. Basically settled in the area except for about a year and a half in China. So I've been here all my life, and I married a Woodridge girl, Karen Kantrowitz, the daughter of Yitz and Gloria. And it's been a pleasure growing up in the area. And yes, my grandfather had the Butler Lodge, and that'll be part of the subject matter of today's topic.
Well, why don't we first also say hello to Morris Cohen, your cousin, who's in what, Augusta? Is that where you are?
Augusta, Georgia, correct.
Well, there's a lot of activity today as the Masters starts.
That's right.
That's right. That's right.
Jake, while we have you, because I know you can't stay the full complement of time. How did your family, unless you want Morris to speak to this, how did your family end up in Sullivan County, and when did they get here?
Yeah, I will. I think, we could kind of go back and forth, Marvin. I appreciate you putting this together. And Lynn, what you're doing is a very important project to preserve history. I think the events of October 7th have reopened many wounds, one of them being how history is turned, lied upon, confiscated, especially now with social media. So I think the work that you're doing here is extremely important. And I would just, sorry that I got to leave a little early, but Marvin, Morris and I could just go kind of back and forth on each question. My mom was Mildred, who was the youngest of the Cohn children. Cohn. She was Mildred Cohn, and she married Norman Billig. She was the youngest of the Cohn siblings. And they grew up on a farm at the top of Columbia Hill in Hurleyville. And I remember the farmhouse to this day. I remember being there with my cousins and my grandfather and grandmother and family. And we would visit it. And they had a wood-burning stove in the farmhouse. I remember my grandmother cooking eggs and potatoes on the wood-burning stove. I also remember a few Passovers that we had in the old farmhouse. So there's a lot of memories from it, and that's how they started, was in the farmhouse.
When?
And Morris, again, I think it's best to tag team. Morris, when I think it in the early 1900s, Morris.
How far back do you want me to go back to Europe?
No. When would they come to Sullivan County and start a business?
Okay. They came from New York City, where they had a delicatessen. Before that, my grandfather was Pincus Cohen was a painter. His brother-in-law taught him the trade, and he used to joke that he got his college education at Columbia University, which is where he painted dormitories there. So that was a joke. He really had about just a Hebrew school education when he was a kid in Europe. But they bought the hotel. It was kind of interesting. It started out as a boarding house, And actually his brother Shmuel Cohn owned the boarding house. But my grandfather said he never had a good business head, and he was constantly borrowing money from my grandfather to keep the hotel or the boarding house afloat. And at one point there was a fire, and the building burned down, and they used the insurance money to build the boarding the main build what became the main building of the hotel.
Roughly what years?
Lodge.
We need some years. When did your grandfather come up here? I guess your uncle was already,
Okay,
his brother was here.
He they bought the hotel from his brother in 1921, and they over the years expanded it. There was the main building, an annex, a love nest where my family would stay during the summers, another building, the deluxe, and the newest building was called the Knickerbocker. And in total, the hotel went from a 22-room boarding house to 120 rooms.
Wow.
So they sold the hotel in 1963 when I was 10. There was a farm in the back of the hotel. It was about 140 acres. They ran the farm mostly cattle, horses, back then. I also remember in the basement where they kept the coal in the farmhouse for the stove. My grandfather had a still down there where he would make his own schnapps, in addition to what he bought legitimately. And I also remember he lived on 3 shots a day and a little bit of onion.
Okay, hold on one second. We're
Yeah.
also joined by Myron Gittell. Myron, you need to put it on mute, because every time you breathe,
Oh,
it comes in and cuts us off.
okay.
We'll get to you if
Yep.
you have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt. Okay, so that was the 1920s.
Correct.
And we know that Butler Lodge, I'll cut to the chase. Butler Lodge became famous, among other reasons, because the word has it that Mel Brooks got his start there. I'll read to you from.
No, that's not word has it. That's the gospel.
Well, all right, so let me read just what Wikipedia said. Mel Brooks was 14 when he gained employment as a poolside tumbler, which we'll talk about, at the Butler Lodge. It says a second-rate Borscht Belt hotel. Where they get this stuff, I don't know. Where he met 18-year-old Sid Caesar. Brooks kept his guests amused with his crazy antics. In a Playboy interview, he explained that one day he stood at the edge of the diving board wearing a derby and a large alpaca overcoat with 2 suitcases full of rocks. And then he announced, "Business is terrible. I can't go on any longer," and jumped fully clothed into the pool. So you could tell us a little bit about that. I assume your family knew.
He was a Michiganer, and I thought he started there a little older than that, but we'll Morris will chime in a sec. But he definitely Sid Caesar was working in the area, and he is cousins with Debbie Newkrug Berman. Debbie's family had the Avon Lodge in Woodridge, and Sid came up to the mountains to work and met Mel at some point, and that's when Mel started to go, work in the city on Show of Shows, and that was really his big break. But he's talked on many talk shows over the years. He's mentioned Butler Lodge. He called it Pink as Pines. It was a place where
Whoops,
I think he's,
I lost him.
yeah.
Hopefully he'll be right back.
Well, do you want me to?
Go ahead. Please go ahead, Morris.
Okay, so this was obviously before my time, but talking to my grandfather about Mel Brooks and my father, Charles Cohen, and my mom, Seal Cohen, the summer before he started working with Sid Caesar, he was actually a drummer in the band at the hotel. And on Saturday nights, they always had a singer and a comedian come up from New York City to entertain in the casino building that was on the hotel. And so because Mel Brooks used to fool around and do shticks and things like you described at the swimming pool, my grandfather went over to him, and I guess the Yiddish term is titmir tuva, do me a favor. And because one Saturday the comedian couldn't come up for some reason. I don't know, he was sick or couldn't get transportation, whatever it was. But so Mel filled in for the comedian and started doing comedy routines at the hotel. And then after the summer was over, that's when he started working with Sid Caesar. And then after that, he went out to California and really got started with his career as an entertainer
somehow,
other than just a writer.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Marvin,
Jake.
somehow I got thrown off the. I couldn't.
Yes.
I tried twice to dial in, but I'm on by phone. But that's okay. You'll give me prompts because I can't. I'm just on the phone. But I don't know where Wikipedia got the 14-year-old because
That's not correct.
Okay,
yeah,
a lot on
he
Wikipedia is
did it
not
after the
correct.
war. He did it. I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Morris. It was a job he had after World War II.
It was the summer before he went to work with Sid Caesar.
Yeah, and that would have been
He
after
only
the war.
worked at the hotel one summer.
One summer, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
right. That is correct.
let's move on from that, because one of the interesting things that I wanted to get to, and I talk about the years, when your mom passed away of blessed memory, we learned in an obit that she was responsible for working in or managing properties of the Cohn family in, of all places, Hot Springs, Arkansas. And that's the first that a lot of us had ever heard about resort Borscht Belt type hotels in the South. Can you speak to that?
Well, I'll start a little because Morris knows more again, but they did, like most of the businesses in the Catskills, they would close down for the winter. Very few of the hotels would stay open. It was seasonal. So they went to Hot Springs. There was work there, business there. And I remember my mom telling me how she would drive with my grandfather, and my grandmother would sit in the back, and she'd be all, the truck wagon they'd have or whatever got packed up. So it was just enough room for my grandmother in the back, Pauline Cohn. And they went down there for the winter. Morris, I'm sure, could fill in a little bit more detail.
Well, from what my grandfather said, they bought a hotel in Hot Springs in 1950. I think they were going, or at least he was going there before then, um, because he had a bad back, which my dad inherited. And he would go there for the mineral baths.
Ah,
Okay, so that's the attraction for the family going there. And Jay is correct. The whole family did not go. It was just my grandfather and grandmother and Jay's mother, Minnie. And so he bought the hotel in 1950 and sold it in 1955.
The Hot
It,
Springs Hotel. The Hot
yeah,
Springs Hotel.
it was called the Knickerbocker, and that's why
did he rename it, or that's what it was called when he bought it?
I think it was already named the Knickerbocker.
Interesting.
And
Not a name I
Yeah.
would associate with the
it
South.
had several owners. They just owned it for a 5-year period of time.
Do you know whether they had people that were guests at the Butler Lodge come down there in the winter, and was that their clientele
so.
in part?
No, I think there was a pretty large Southern Jewish clientele at that time. Now, I don't
remember-
know for sure if, it might be certainly possible that some New Yorkers did do that, like my grandfather did, for the mineral baths. It
I
was
remember
a,
my mom telling me there were a few guests in New York who would come down. Not a lot, but I think many escaped either to Florida or somewhere else south. But there was a few I remember her saying that did patronize him.
Of course, we're talking
because
prior
most
to
of the hotels, other than the big ones, the Concord, the Grossingers, those, they didn't have heat in those rooms or air conditioning. So, it was pretty much a July 4th to Labor Day season, up in the Catskills. And occasionally, some of the hotels, I know my grandfather did this, they would stay open into September if Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur came out early that year, and then they'd pay a chazan to come and have services in the casino building. But it was pretty much a July 4th to Labor Day operation. Now the farm ran all the time in the back of the property. So in the wintertime, he would go to Hot Springs for the mineral baths, like I said, and then eventually said, well, let me buy a hotel. So they ran one for I guess 5 years. So that's the main building in Hurleyville. That's the Butler Lodge main building.
So wait, set the scene. The Columbia, when you're going up the hill from Hurleyville, the Columbia is on your right. Where was the Butler Lodge? On the left side, across from the Columbia,
No, if
or
you're coming
further?
up the road from Hurleyville, the Butler Lodge is on your left.
On the left side.
Okay.
There's nothing there
Yeah.
at this time that even resembles what was left of a hotel, but that's where it was. And at some point, I guess the building burned or was torn down or what have
Well,
you.
what happened was when they sold the hotel in 1963, it became the family that bought
Stanley.
the hotel. It became what called Camp Stanley, and it was a camp for overweight girls. And I can tell you a little story because the way the sale went through, my grandparents were able to keep the farmhouse in the back of the hotel, and that's where they lived full time after they sold the hotel. And when the camp opened up, my grandmother in the hotel always worked in the kitchen 24/7. That was her domain. You know,
Yeah,
she had
I
like
remember that.
Mel Brooks, Kids Around. There was a Filipino salad man. She had an assistant cook. There was always a baker, but she did a lot of the baking. And so when they opened up Camp Stanley, the girls were on a very restricted diet. And it was mostly diet and exercise back then. That was the routine. And the girls found out about my grandparents living in the farmhouse in the back, and they would go back there and sneak back there, and my grandmother would give them cookies.
That's a
Marvin,
great story. Yes.
let me interrupt you for 1 second before Jay has to leave. I'm curious how what you two learn from the family business or from growing up in Sullivan County. What are some of those things that have carried through to your present lives? I noticed on the wall behind Morris, there's quite a few fishing trophies. I'm assuming he learned to fish in Sullivan County. So just either one of you, if you could answer that question before
Jay,
Jay
you
has to
go
leave.
ahead, because I know you got to go.
Yeah, no, I'll start. Well, I think, you know, thank you for the question. To me, it's a few things. The history of the area. Our family was part of that great history where the hotel industry kind of rose. There was many hotels of various sizes, and it was a very vibrant industry. So we were part of that. So that's a pride that we all have in our family, that we were a little part of it. And then it's able to grow more because of someone like Mel Brooks, who kind of worked there. Even though it was a year, it's still something that had an indelible print on us all. And the other part of it is family. My Aunt Rita Cohn, who married Nathan Mandel, they moved to Long Island. Morris's father, Charles and Cecile, and then my mother and father, Norman and Minnie Billig, they stayed local. In fact, they built houses next to each other in Woodburn, and my grandfather eventually built a house right there. So we had a little family compound, and we grew up together, and we stayed in very close contact with the Mandels, my mother, the oldest sister, Rita. So it really was family. And I remember not only the Passovers in the farmhouse, but in my grandfather's house in Woodburn, you know, all of us there till late at night. And that we saw Morris's dad and my mother and Rita, how they stayed together and they kept in touch and, you know, with each other. And to this day, we still do the same thing. And that I think are the two main takeaways, so to speak, the being part of that history of the Catskills, seeing it and being part of it, as well as just underscoring family.
And did you work in the hotels, Jay?
I didn't, because I was 58, so I was very young.
Okay.
I have memories of being in the lobby, being in the kitchen. I remember the pool, and then after it was sold, you know, they still lived in the farmhouse, so we had access, and we went down there and we hung out at the farmhouse, and
did you work in any of the other hotels?
That's the bulk of my memories. Oh yeah, no, we that was another thing. This area, I think, there was such a strong middle class during the hotel era, we'll call it. And that's what's an important background of any society. And you had, you know, middle class working families. Woodburn, you know, South Fallsburg was a big town. Monticello was the big city. And so we did work. I started at 11 years old. And eventually I got back I worked at the Concord, The Concord had a card room. My dad worked in the men's shop of the Concord. At night, he sold tickets at the Raceway for a second job. My mom was a bookkeeper in one of the hotels, typical kind of Borscht Belt family. And I worked as a busboy waiter in many of the hotels. I parked cars. And then eventually I had what was the cream job. I worked in the card room at the Concord. They had almost 24-hour games. We had 2 shifts, straight shifts. We made more than the waiters did in the dining room from the tips, because there's always a winning player, so you always get tipped. And so that was my main job right before law school. But and I remember, because Labor Day was always a good week. The Labor Day week, we made a lot of money, so I took out the Cohn family, the Billig family. We went to the Dodgen Steakhouse. That celebrated the end of the summer season, and I was flush with cash. And I was being a big shot. I would take the families out for Dodgen steak, and so it really developed a work ethic growing up here, and also a community ethic, which is being carried on by you guys in terms of the library and doing what you're doing in this very good mission. So yeah, that's
Thanks.
I think that answers the question.
Yeah,
No,
thank you.
Very
And,
good, Jay.
and
But
And
I do
Morris,
have to,
what
I do
about
have to
you?
sign off, and I do have to sign off. Let me thank you guys again. I'm sorry it's short, but again, I've given you the memories that I have, which is very, very young. But yet I do remember the hotel and a little bit of the hustle bustle in it. But it's more the memory, not just of the hotel, but the farmhouse there, and just being together with Morris's family and mine, and growing up. That's really, it was a magical time up here. So thank you very much for the work you're doing in recording everything.
thanks.
Thanks, Jake.
All right. Again, my apologies that I have to sign off. And if I find any other photos, my brother was away. He just got back. So he has a lot of the memorabilia, Marvin. I will have him take top pictures and email them to you. He's got a lot of Butler Lodge memorabilia.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Gesund and gesinnte Hate.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Morris, I'll talk to you.
Morris, what, are there other thoughts that you wanted to share with us? I mean, you've really done a study of all of this. We don't have time for your whole family tree. How about your personal experiences? When did you move? Well, you never actually lived up here, but you lived here. You came up for the summers. From where? Not from Augusta. Where did you grow up?
No, I grew up in Woodburn.
Ah, okay.
Okay, went to elementary school in Woodburn, middle school, and I think back then it was Woodridge, and high school at Fallsburg Central.
Right.
From there, I went to
What year did you graduate?
Fallsburg,
Yeah.
1971, I believe.
Okay.
We were
And then did you leave the
Comets.
area? Did you leave the area?
I went to undergraduate at the University of Rochester. They conveniently didn't tell me that there was snow on the ground till April up there, and they had underground tunnels to get you from building to building. So I got kind of shanghaied going there.
Did you work in the hotels also in the summer?
Yeah. Well, I actually had a few odd jobs working at the Butler Lodge for my grandfather. One was I was kind of the paper boy when I got old enough. I probably did that from maybe 7 to 10 when they sold it. So back then they had all the Jewish papers, so you had to keep which guest wanted which paper. And I remember there was the Forwards, was one of the Jewish papers.
Yeah.
Besides the, the Daily News and the Times and the Post.
Yeah, the Allgemeiner. Yeah.
Yeah. So they paid for the paper as part of their the room rate. which my two aunts kept up with, Rita and Jay's mom. I call her Minnie. But I would get tips from them because I would have to go find them on the grounds and bring them their paper in the morning after they ate breakfast. And then the other thing I did, probably also around the same time, to make a little extra money, and this really aggravated the waiters and in the dining room. I would put on a pair of black pants and a white shirt, kind of like, you know, the waiter costume, and go around with a metal tray in the dining room, walking up and down the aisles, and the guests would, some of them would ask me to go in the kitchen and get them this, that, and the other, and I got tips from, you know, they give me a dime or a quarter or whatever to go get, you know, and it really aggravated the waiters.
Ah, Lone Ranger. Never heard of that before.
Yeah.
How about as you got older, you do it, you know, were you a waiter as well? Other hotels?
Oh, in the hotels in the area?
Yeah.
Let's see, what did I do? I worked in a luncheonette in Woodburn. That was during Woodstock. That's an interesting story in and of itself. My dad, I think he told you, he was a volunteer fireman and on the board of commissioners for the fire department and the first aid department. He actually flew in to Woodstock, and worked in the medical tent there. And when he I'll never forget this, when he came back, it was late one night, and he came over to me and he said, "Who the hell is Janis Joplin?"
Aha. Right.
So yeah, that was an interesting time there. Worked in a luncheonette there. I did work in some of the hotels. I was a lifeguard one year at Zalkin's Trailer Park, it was on the road going to Ellenville from Woodburn. It used to, Jack Zalkin had a hotel and it burned down, and he converted it into a trailer park. He probably
Right.
did better with the trailer park, I think, than he did with the hotel. But anyway, so yeah, you know, some weekends I would work in the dining room, you know, in the larger hotels that stayed open all year long.
And then you headed
yeah.
south at some point.
Yeah, after college, I did my graduate work at Georgia State and University of Georgia. Go Dogs! And earned a doctoral degree, and then I spent the major professional time as a faculty member in the Department of Neurology, Pediatrics, and Psychiatry at the Medical College of Georgia, which is what got me to Augusta. And married my wife, who's from Macon, Georgia. So technically I'm what they refer to as a damn Yankee. I married a Southern girl and stayed. So yeah, we've been in Augusta ever since. But
And you
some of
kept on,
those,
and you kept on fishing.
well, yeah, I'm now a avid bass fisherman, so yeah. But you know, some of the things that my grandfather taught me, and you know, you pick up at the hotel, certainly is a work ethic. You know, running a hotel back then, it's a 24/7 job, especially you know, especially when it's a small family run hotel. You know, I can remember one time my parents went to one night during the week, went to the racetrack and left me to babysit my younger brother. He's 5 years younger. He woke up in the middle of the night. He was probably maybe one and a half, and I couldn't get him back to sleep no matter what I tried. And so I went on a hunt for my grandmother, and there she was, you know, working away in the kitchen, doing prep work for, you know, what was on the menu the next day. And that was probably, you know, 1 o'clock at night, you know, so, you know, a strong work ethic is something, that, you know, came across all the time, you know, with our family. I would also say, you know, never lie. Uh, they advertised the hotel as, you know, my grandparents kept kosher, strict kosher, but they advertised the hotel as kosher style because they could never guarantee that a busboy or a waiter might use a milchix when it was flashix. And, you know, I could remember also my grandfather chasing them around in the kitchen, you know, with with an object of kitchen harm, you know, yelling at them, you know, if they would do that. But
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
I don't remember too many places advertising kosher style. You know, dietary laws observed is the way
Yeah.
most said.
but
And, but for those who asked when they came in, is this glatt kosher or what have you? The
yeah,
answer
no,
was no.
they never
Yeah.
put themselves out as what they
Yeah.
were not.
Yeah.
You know, I have another memory of with my cousin Harold, who was supposed to be on this. We figured out very quickly when the vegetable deliveries were made, because there was always a large number of watermelon that were included in a delivery, and they would take them and put them in this big walk-in cooler that was in the kitchen. And you know, so we would each get a knife, and you know, we timed the delivery so that we would get locked in the cooler with the watermelon.
A lot of stories that go with the
Yeah,
life in the
yeah.
kitchen. Let's see if we can sort of summarize where we are.
Sure.
I think what you've underscored is what a lot of us learned by growing up here. And Jake mentioned at the outset something about the culture, the family nature of the culture. Almost all the hotels were family operated. Rarely was some business person came in and operated it like a lonesome business. Almost all were boarding houses converted to hotels, and all were family owned and operated, which means everybody got into the act. There were some people who lived far away. They would show up and maybe get a room, but most of the time, people that lived around here contributed to the success, the overall success, or the lack thereof in some cases, because really, I think in the 50s, 40s, everybody did very well, relatively, those that stayed in business. And then the 60s, it became more difficult when indoor pools were required, upgrading of the casino to the nightclub. So your story has underscored what it was like for a family to really grow up together. And that I did this at Delano. My family was there, and I have a number of cousins. We all grew up more like brothers and sisters because every summer we spent the time together. And so we thank you for your sharing your experience. Apparently, you're the historian. I'm the one in my family, and you keep track of all of these things, and it keeps the family together, you know, even though they're living all across the country. Was there anything in particular about growing up here that you think stands out in your memory beyond that family connection and culture? Anything about the hotel industry culture? I mean, you're, you know, a neurologist and so forth. That's not
Or a
something you
psychologist.
normally, or a psychologist, although that may help. Anything else as we close down our conversation about growing up here that you wanted to comment on?
I think the summers for us, because we lived in Woodburn for most of the year, and then, you know, as I said, towards the end, you know, when school got out the end of June, we moved to the hotel.
Yes.
You know, my father worked at Channel Masters and then would come at night and work at the hotel. I remember he would always cut the grass at night, and I would ride on the back of the tractor with him. That was a fun thing. You know, my two aunts, Rita and Minnie, were, you know, that they took care of the front office. My grandfather was all around, you know, grandmother took care of the kitchen. But, you know, most of the time during the day, you know, it was like Disney World. I mean, you could run free. You know, you went swimming whenever you wanted to. If you wanted to go down to the camp where, you know, the guest kids were having a good time, you could do that. If you wanted to go in the woods and just, you know, whatever, fish, whatever, you know, it was just a free time, and we don't have that anymore. You know, it used to be, you know, you couldn't let your kids out, and now you can't even let them on the cell phones because you know, who knows what they're going to get into on the internet, you know, so
Morris, do you think that was specific to growing up here, or pretty much because of what life was like in the 50s and 60s, different from now, that was true for most kids growing up wherever they lived?
I think it was probably a combination of both. You know, I think if you were a child growing up in the city, there are some constraints that, you know, that mandates that you don't have in the country. Because I mean, I remember, you know, I would get up in the morning, have breakfast, and I didn't return home until, you know, it was dinner time. You know, when we were living in Woodburn, and you know, it was pretty much the same at the hotel. I mean, you know, all the cousins had kind of free reign of 140 acres and a swimming
Morris,
pool. And
let me ask you just one other related question. You mentioned that your dad worked at Channel Master. Did most of the men, and I'm going to say men in those days, have quote unquote real jobs? Not that the hotel wasn't real, but did they have jobs in other areas? And then when the hotels reopened, kind of did double duty? Was that true for most or many?
I think a good number of them did do double duty. Like, you know, Jay was saying his dad worked at the Concord Men's Shop. And then he would go to the racetrack at night. You know, and I know a lot of dads, you know, had that kind of a routine. You know, my dad had his day job at Channel Master and then worked at the hotel at night. My aunt's, it was 24/7 hotel. As were my grandparents.
Before, yeah.
Now my mom taught school in Fallsburg, and you know, so she spent her summers at the hotel. But she did not get involved in the in the front office stuff, and that was pretty much my aunt's domain.
Yeah, that's almost a separate story. Having grown up, my mom managed our office at our hotel, and there were certain turf issues, you know,
Yeah.
who could work where,
Every
and you know, don't come in and tell us how to change the system and so forth and so on. But I think Lynn, a lot of the men that had full-time jobs that didn't change in the summer did double duty. But like my dad, he did like insurance. So in the summer, he could put it on the shelf and, you know, be at the hotel full time because he didn't answer to a boss and so forth. But a lot of the men did do that. And a lot of the women worked in the winter in various stores in town.
and a lot of the folks up there, you know, had hotel related jobs. You know, I don't know how many kosher butchers there were. You know, every town had at least one or two, and they
That
were
supplied the hotels.
yeah, they were all suppliers to the hotels.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
Well, most of the small businesses, or many of them, the laundromats, the butchers, produce, candies, stuff like that, had the trade for all the hotels that kept them going. and the winter became an issue. Morris, thank you for sharing the time with us. And
Oh, you're most welcome.
you know, tell Jake the same, that we appreciate it. You've added another little piece for that mosaic that we're trying to put together of the Catskill culture and the Borscht Belt days, and also what it's like growing up locally here, and having a very interesting and I would say productive, fruitful, enjoyable, early years for so many of us.
Yeah.
We appreciate it, and we wish you well, Lynn. Thank you as always. And as Jake said, sei gesund, be well, and maybe we'll chat again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You guys take care now.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.